It's time for Money, Power, Politics. And once again, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is repeating the false claim that tariffs are not a tax on consumers. Please watch this.
Hasbro says they're going to have to increase their prices. Goldman Sachs says 86% of the tariff revenue collected so far has been paid by American businesses and consumers. So just bottom line, Mr. Secretary, do you acknowledge that these tariffs are a tax on American consumers?
No, I don't.
Even though you have companies saying they are going to have to increase prices, and given the fact that 86% of these tariffs so far have been paid by Americans.
You're quoting Goldman Sachs. So
yes, Goldman Sachs, correct.
I made
which I said, yeah.
I made a good career trading against Goldman Sachs.
And I assure you, the people that he worked with in that good career know exactly how tariffs work, and they know he's dead wrong. If you do not believe me, believe American history. Let's go back to the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930, shall we? The year after the Great Crash. Unemployment surged and industrial production plummeted. What happened? We raised tariffs on roughly 20,000 imported goods. What was the goal? To protect American farmers and manufacturers. Have we heard that before? At the time, more than 1,000 economists urged then-President Herbert Hoover to veto this bill, warning that it would injure the majority of our citizens. But in the end, Hoover signed it into law. And other countries retaliated with their own tariffs. Does that sound familiar? Global trade collapsed by 65% between the years 1929 and 1934. No surprise, dramatically worsening the Depression. So if you do not trust the warning signs, just trust history and the painful scars on our country's economic past. Tariffs are hidden taxes on American consumers, but they don't stay hidden for long. For more, I want to bring in Charlotte Howard, executive editor and New York bureau chief for The Economist, and Bharat Ramamurthy, former National Economic Council deputy director. He's also the author of The Bully Pulpit on Substack. What's going on here? I mean, Secretary Bessent just tried to push Kristen Welker oh, you're quoting Goldman Sachs. I beat them for years. Give me a break. Yes, Scott Bessent was a super successful investor, and all sorts of investors now consider him the sane person on the inside. But day in and day out, that's factually incorrect. He knows it, and so does every person with any credibility who understands economics and business.
I think that there's a fundamental problem, which is that the Trump administration knows that their constituents are paying more attention to what the president says than what economists at Goldman Sachs say, right? So we've seen again and again that people go more on vibes than on data necessarily. But Scott Bessent, in particular within this administration, is trying to add an air of authority, normalcy to what are an extremely extraordinary set of actions. I mean, not just tariffs, right, but their actions against Lisa Cook at the Fed. You look across the array of things that they're doing within the economy. And it's unlike, to your point, it's unlike anything that we've seen in many decades. And the history lesson that you just gave and the numbers from Goldman Sachs, I don't think are what their constituents are paying too much attention to.
Bharat, weigh in here. Even if those constituents aren't paying attention to Goldman Sachs or yours truly, they're starting to feel it more and more with products they buy, with going to, I mean, you buy things now and you actually see in some cases, here's a tariff charge. How much longer can they keep this baloney up?
I mean, it is nonsensical, and I don't think that they're really fooling anybody. If you see the inflation data, for example, shows that goods prices have gone up. That reflects the higher cost of tariffs. And remember, the whole point of tariffs is to make these imported goods more expensive so that people have an incentive to buy American goods. If they weren't making things more expensive for consumers, they wouldn't be achieving whatever their purported goal was. So again, none of these claims make any sense. And I think that as much as they might be trying to hoodwink the American people, they're really seeing right through it. If you look at an array of polling data that came out over the last several days, you see that, number one, Americans have a very low approval rating of Donald Trump on the economy and inflation. They don't think that he's doing enough to address the cost of living. And in fact, his core agenda is driving up the cost of living. And number two, about 40% of Americans said that they are buying less stuff because prices have gone up because of tariffs. I mean, that's a huge number of Americans who feel like their lives have been negatively affected directly because of a policy decision by the president. So Secretary Bessent can go on the Sunday shows and say whatever he wants and make claims about how he's better trader than Goldman Sachs. But American people who have gone back to school shopping or trying to buy some new items for themselves or go and buy a new appliance for their house are all seeing these higher prices every day.
And while we've heard very, very little from big names on Wall Street about Trump's economic policies or what he's doing with regard to the Fed's independence, that is changing because just yesterday, Citadel founder Ken Griffin warned that the president's attacks on the Federal Reserve, I want to get the quote right, have steep costs, and his changes to the Bureau of Labor Statistics has already damaged our credibility. What does that mean for someone like Ken Griffin, right? One of the biggest investors on the planet, probably one of the has to be one of the richest guys in Trump's adopted home state of Florida, to say something like this. What does that mean?
I think it's notable that he said something. I would also point out how notable it is that he's the only one.
Boom.
So every single person in all of his colleagues, all of his peers across the industry are thinking the exact same thing, but no one will say it. And they are saying it. I will note that they are saying it to Trump in private. People go and lobby the president directly, right? They're trying to get, or through Scott Bessent, as you pointed out. But the public statements have just been extremely muted. And to go back to your history lesson, I mean, the markets know, investors know that central bank autonomy is crucial to the functioning of economies. That's why, Mexico, Peru, Poland in the 1990s, they all reformed their economies, and part of that was giving central banks independence. Donald Trump is unlearning that lesson. But CEOs in general are too timid. They see what happens when they speak out, and they don't want to be in the public eye.
All right, let's talk about the Supreme Court and these tariffs, Bharat. I spoke to investors today who are sort of hoping and praying that the Supreme Court knocks down Trump's tariffs. But even if they do, is Trump just going to find a workaround to impose them?
Look, he has other legal avenues available to him to impose these tariffs. They might be a little bit clunkier. They might require an investigation. They might not be able to be as extensive as the ones he's put in place. But I think that you can get a bulk of these tariffs back in place using other legally available authorities. Then again, you might then go through another legal process where those are challenged. So this may be going on for quite some period of time. I think one other important point here is that if, in fact, the Supreme Court closes off all of these avenues for imposing tariffs, that might be a relief for consumers. But remember, they're projecting something like $1 to $2 trillion worth of revenue from these tariffs, which were supposed to offset the $4 trillion cost of their massive tax cut for the rich. If that goes away, that might be a relief to consumers. But the debt of the United States is going to be in much, much worse condition. And that might be troubling for markets, too, in terms of the cost of borrowing for Americans, the interest expenses that we end up paying because of the massive bill that they passed with tax cuts for the very wealthy and for corporations.
I'm anxious to see what the Supreme Court does, even though they seem to be siding with Trump a lot lately. Donald Trump's reasoning for imposing the tariffs was we had to do it, we had to address the trade deficits. Then how on earth are they going to explain Brazil, where we have a trade surplus, but you've got a former president in Bolsonaro that Trump has said he's mad at the way he's being treated and imposed the tariffs? What is the Supreme Court going to say about that?